Stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Leng. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am reviewing the Rogue cards from the Unspeakable Oath, the second Mythos pack in the Path to Carcosa cycle. I split up the review of this Mythos pack into 5 parts to make it a little easier for you to digest. So make sure you check out the reviews of the other classes when you've got a chance. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. And if you enjoy what you hear, maybe consider subscribing. With that in mind, let's see what the designers have to offer Arkham Horror's Rogues in this pack. The first rogue card in the pack is Daario El-Amin, Unscrupulous Investor. He's a 4-cost ally with an intellect icon and the ally and patron traits. He has the game text, while you have 10 or more resources, you get +1 willpower and +1 intellect. And action, if there are no enemies at your location, exhaust Daario El-Amin, gain 2 resources. He has 2 health, 2 sanity, and takes up the ally slot. The Arkham Horror LCG's third patron, Daario turns our perspective on resources really on its head. Since the core set drop, there's been really no incentive for players to save resources. Often you just spend them as quickly as you get them. Daario encourages you to do something a little bit different. He encourages you to save, and he entices you with that prospect of a passive +1 willpower and +1 intellect boost if you have at least 10 resources in your resource pool. And it's nice he'll even help you get there, giving you 2 resources if you take an action to exhaust him. Now, if my experience with investing has taught me anything, it's really that patience is the key to success. And I think the same is true of our friend Daario here. Like all good investments, Daario rewards patience. 10 resources is a lot to squirrel away for a rainy day, especially if you're playing an investigator like Jenny Barnes, who often spends her resources on boosts from talents as quickly as she earns them. If you want those passive skill boosts, you really need to set up a stable economic engine that will produce enough resources to help you establish your board state, as well as achieve your investing goals. I think Daario is one piece of that puzzle, but so are cards like Burglary and Emergency Cash from the core set and Lone Wolf from the Blood in the Altar Mythos pack. I think there are going to be quite a few players who are going to be tempted to slap Daario down on the table on turn 1 and try to race to 10 resources as quickly as possible. Daario does set you back 4 resources, but it's really not that hard for an investigator to accumulate 10 resources in 2 or 3 turns if you're willing to commit to it. However, I would urge you to be a little bit cautious trying to do that. I'm not sure that's the best strategy because it will leave you unprepared to leave your board state really underdeveloped. Let's take a look at Jenny Barnes, for example. Assuming you've got Daario in your opening hand and you play him on the first turn, you could enter your first upkeep phase with anywhere from 3 to 9 resources. Although 9 is pretty unlikely, considering you would need to draw Daario and 2 copies of Emergency Cash in your opening hand. I think 6 to 8 is a more realistic goal, depending on whether you do draw at least 1 Emergency Cash in your hand or not. You should be able to turn on Daario by turn 2. The only question is when. If you generated 6 resources on your first turn, you're going to need to take an action to exhaust Daario and then take 2 more actions to gain resources if you want Daario's bonus by the end of your turn. Alternatively, you could always exhaust Daario and then wait until the upkeep phase to gain the remaining resources. Most other investigators should be able to turn Daario on by the end of turn 2 as well, although they're going to have to dedicate more actions to it. If you're lucky enough to draw an Emergency Cash in your opening hand, you can exhaust Daario at the beginning of your second turn to turn on his bonus. You'll have 2 actions remaining, although you're really not going to be able to play many cards if you want to hang on to those hard-earned skill bonuses. As tempting as this strategy sounds, I'd be very wary of going all in on Daario. at the beginning of the game. As you can see from this example, it's going to take Jenny anywhere from 4 to 6 actions to turn on Daario's skill boosts. However, your board state's really going to consist of Daario and really not much else. And there's a pretty good chance you're not going to be prepared for what the encounter deck throws at you. And more than likely, you're just going to end up throwing Daario under the bus to survive, and you can kiss all those skill bonuses goodbye. I think you're much better off to play the long game with Daario, aiming to turn on his skill bonus in the mid to late game. You're going to need to spend actions to gain resources more frequently, but Daario is going to make those actions a little bit more efficient by chipping in with an extra resource. If you play smart and try to rely on more passive skill bonuses rather than those from talents, I think you should be able to leverage Daario a little more effectively. I really like how Daario challenges players to rethink the role of resources in the Arkham Horror LCG. I think he's going to see he could see play in quite a few different rogue decks, but I think he's really a card you need to build a deck around if you really want to take advantage of him. Of the 3 patrons that we've seen so far this cycle, I think Daario is the one I'm looking forward to building a deck around the most in the future. Yeah, he's a pretty interesting card, and I'm really looking forward to trying him out. The next card in the pack is the level 2 version of Sneak Attack, a rogue event from the core set. Sneak Attack has 1 intellect and 2 combat skill icons. The tactic trait and the game text deal 2 damage to an enemy not engaged with you at your location. Sneak Attack is a powerful card because it's one of the few ways in the game to damage an enemy without making a skill test. That's great, especially if you're playing on a higher level of difficulty where the variance in the Chaos Bag makes weapons a little less reliable than they normally would be on standard. Sneak Attack is an event, so it automatically warrants consideration in any Safina Rousseau deck. This version of Sneak Attack costs the same as its core set counterpart. However, it does give you an extra combat icon, and it allows you to target an enemy that is not engaged with you, rather than an exhausted enemy. If you were playing the core set version, you often needed to evade an enemy first before you could sneak attack. First off, I really love the second combat icon on this card. Besides the Chicago typewriter from the Lost in Time and Space Mythos pack, Sneak Attack is the only rogue card with 2 combat icons. I've been paying a lot more attention to the icon spread in my decks of late, and the 2 combat icons are surprisingly hard to come by outside of the neutral skill overpower. And I'd seriously consider picking up this card just for the icons, depending on the build I was working on. Sneak Attack's uses in solo play are fairly limited, since most of the enemies do engage you automatically. You can use it to damage aloof enemies, such as the pain-in-the-butt whippoorwills in the Dunwich Legacy, or the man in the pallid mask in the Path to Carcosa. I'm sort of still debating whether I'm willing to pay 2 experience points for that effect, but it looks like the man in the pallid mask is going to be a thorn in players' sides for most, if not all, of the Path to Carcosa campaign. So it certainly might be a worthwhile investment to be able to do 2 damage to him fairly reliably. Sneak Attack is much more versatile in multiplayer, since you can use it to damage enemies engaged with other investigators. The beauty of Sneak Attack is that, unlike Ambush, which I looked at in the review of the Guardian cards in this pack, Sneak Attack really asks absolutely nothing of you other than the 2 resources. It's not a flashy card by any stretch of the imagination, but it is effective. It doesn't require you to jump through many hoops. You can just play it, do the damage, and move on. The level 0 version of Sneak Attack is a good card in multiplayer or a deck packing some type of evasion tech. The level 2 version of Sneak Attack is even more versatile. The value of damaging an enemy without making a skill test really can't be understated, and finding 2 combat skill icons on a card is rare indeed. The only question mark hanging over this card is really how much play it's going to see, since rogues have some of the most powerful and expensive upgrades in the game. If you're trying to squirrel away, I think it's 6 experience points to pick up Ace in the Hole. You know, it's going to be a little difficult to save for some of those, like the gold pocket watch, Ace in the Hole, the lucky dice, I think, as well. So spending 2 experience points, it feels like it's a little bit on the high side to me, but truth be told, I'm already coveting this card in the Safina deck that I've been playing. So I'm not sure the experience point cost is going to be much of a deterrent in the end. That's going to do it for my look at the rogue cards in the Unspeakable Oath Mythos pack. I think rogues do really well in this pack. Daario Elamine is one of the most, if not the most interesting patrons released so far this cycle. I think he's going to be great in the mid to late game when resources tend to pool up on your investigator card. And he might just be the harbinger of a new rogue deck archetype, which is, I think that's really exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing whether these sort of resource hoarding decks receive more support in future Mythos packs to really flesh out that archetype and encourage you to hang on to your resources rather than spend them. The level 2 version of Sneak Attack is pretty much just, it's straightforward, it's powerful. Like I said, I'm already looking at it for a Safina deck, and I think a lot of players are going to be tempted to pick it up if they're playing in a multiplayer campaign, or you've decided to experiment with playing on hard or expert difficulty. That's going to do it for me today. If you enjoyed this review, I'd appreciate it if you could leave me a thumbs up. It helps out the channel a great deal. Do you agree or disagree with this review? By all means, leave a comment down below. Let me know your experience with these cards. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to be notified of when I release future content. If you'd like to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.